Hey guys, we are in Revelation, and today in class, this is Monday afternoon for me. Today in class, we looked at Revelation chapter 12, and we looked at 17, and we were looking at the women. We were trying to sort out the symbols here. What's going on in 11, 12, 13, and 14 is a series of images. And there's some scary looking beasts, and there's angels with scrolls, and there's witnesses, and then there's this thing about a woman and a child and a dragon trying to eat the kid. And yeah, we're trying to sort that out in the big picture swing of what's going on in the book of Revelation. And here's, I think, how we orient what's happening in these texts. Okay. First, in Revelation chapter 9, we walked away from the 7 trumpets. Okay. And we've had trumpet number 6, and then in 10, the angel showed up with a little scroll, and there were 2 witnesses, and then at the end of 11, the 7th trumpet sounds, and we see in heaven, as God's temple in heaven is opened and all this other stuff. Now we see in heaven a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and we're trying to sort her out. And then there's this battle in heaven, and Satan and his angels are cast out of heaven and onto the earth. Okay, and they're cast out, and then we hear, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. And I think this is the sort of call of the text of Revelation. They conquer. Remember, we're playing on this word conquering. They conquer by the blood of the Lamb, the death of the Lamb, by their testimony to the Lamb, and because they're willing to die for the Lamb and that testimony. That's 12:11. Therefore rejoice, heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you on the earth and sea. The devil has come down to you in great wrath. He knows his time is short. So, here it comes. And then what we get in 13 is a beast, powered by this dragon in 12, okay, who's been given authority for 1,260 days, 42 months. The woman spent 1,260 days in the wilderness. The witnesses spent 1,260 days on the earth. So it seems like this is all taking place in the same time span, all in this weird 3.5-year swing, which is an interesting time frame. It might just be the time frame that it is. It might have something to do with the fact that Jesus' ministry seems to be right about 3.5 years. I don't know. So we've got this 3-year time frame, 3.5 years. And what's happening in 12, we see a bit of it, right? The dragon became furious with the woman, went off to make war with the rest of her offspring, and then we get shoved right into this next creature. And all of these creatures look like something that's come out of Daniel chapter 7 or Daniel chapter 8. And so these are creatures we've seen before. And I think what's happening is John is looking at these creatures and saying all of these other empires that have stood before. Rome is sort of the amalgamation of all of those other evil empires. But what happens in 13 is that there's a conflict that begins. The faith and the endurance of the saints over and against the tyranny of these empires. But in 14, we look and we see Mount Zion and the Lamb standing on Zion with the 144,000 that had been marked from chapter 7. Remember? The 144,000 he heard, but then when he saw the great multitude. And now there are these individuals singing song and praise and worship to God. And so there's this really stark contrast on the earth. Satan and his minions running around, wreaking havoc, making war on the saints, the offspring of the woman. You can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. And people die. But the contrasting image is in chapter 14. It's with the Lamb on Mount Zion. It's peaceful. And it's pure. And there's no lie found there. And then there's an angel who flies overhead with the gospel proclaimed to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, and language. And another angel who says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. That's not going to happen until 3 chapters from now. But it's already being declared. Because remember, it's not about the time factor. It's about the reality factor. This isn't about when it's happening in time. This is about the reality of the situation that's in front of us. Here is a call, this is 14:12, for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus Christ. I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. May they rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. The way they've lived, follow them. In what we've done in this life echoes in eternity. Right? And there's a white cloud, and seated on it is one like the Son of Man. An angel comes from the temple and calls out with a loud voice. Right? Put your sickle, reap the harvest. Yeah. And then as this section ends, we get into 15. And 15 and 16 will get us into the bowls of God's wrath. And we're going to talk about those in person. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole without you. Okay. But I want to follow through this logic we've had so far and sort of see if I can tie together what's going on in the book. In Revelation, we've got a couple of things here. One, John's in heaven and he's looking at the reality in heaven. And he sees God seated on his throne, king of the whole earth. And Jesus Christ, the Lamb, who rules and reigns with him. And there's instructions that are given to all the churches. And as Jesus acts and opens up the seals on this scroll that he's seen in heaven, things happen. But those things that happen seem to be odd and incomplete. And so we're waiting for their sort of culmination. And we see a huge community of people from all over the world gathered and marked, sealed in salvation for the Lamb. And we see another series of 7 things that transpire that create havoc and bring judgment. And then there's another pause. And John's given words to prophesy. And there are 2 witnesses who will be conquered, but who will conquer. And they're these Moses and Elijah-esque figures. And at the sounding of the 7th trumpet, John sees the temple opened in heaven and then sees this great conflict there. There's a woman who has a child. And that child is rescued, it seems. And then the dragon and his army are cast out of the heavens. And they go and pursue the woman and her offspring on the earth. And like we said yesterday, so there's a couple of ways to interpret that, right? It's either Mary and Jesus, or it's Zion and the church, or Zion and Jesus, perhaps. But what's powering the empires of the day in 13 and in 14 is the devil in chapter 12. This dragon, Satan figure in chapter 12. In chapter 1, we see some glimpses of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. In chapter 16 and in chapter 20, we see the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. In chapter 5, we see a lamb standing as if it had been slain. In chapter 13, we see a beast that's been wounded but brought back to life. In chapter 7, we see the sealing and the mark, the name of God on the saints. And in 13, we get the mark of the beast. Okay, in 16 through 18. And we're going to look at that here in just a second. In chapter 17, we see the great harlot arrayed in purple and scarlet. But in 14, we see the multitude gathered with the Lamb on Zion. Notice she sits on 7 mountains, and Zion is on the Temple Mount. And in chapter 19, that community gathered at Zion is a bride clothed in white garments. It's these contrasts. And what we've got going on are 2 competing kingdoms. The kingdom of the earth, John's vision empowered by Satan to bring about doom and destruction and all kinds of crazy. And perhaps it looks like the Roman Empire in chapter 17. We're going to talk about that more in just a second here in chapter 13. On the flip side, you have the kingdom of the Lamb. It's peaceful. It looks on the earth like it's conquered, but it's actually the conquering kingdom, because it conquers in the same manner as the Lamb. And so there's a statement here about, listen, Rome has power. Sure, they have power, and they're going to kill you, but that power is not definitive. It's not ultimate. It's not final. That power has a limit. Okay? And so this kingdom in 13 is going to be allowed to make war on the saints, like we saw in 12. And it might even have power to conquer them. But those whose names are written in the book of life will find themselves with the Lamb in chapter 14. So really what Revelation is setting up for us is this contrast of kingdoms, is this paradigm of kingdoms in conflict with one another. And on one hand, you have the kingdom of God. And on the other hand, you have the kingdom of Rome, the kingdom of Satan and the devil. The kingdom of God conquers like the Lamb has conquered, by being conquered and then being raised. But the kingdom of the earth, well, it conquers differently. And so in 13, it's talking about this mark. And it says this: it also causes all of those, both small and great, rich and poor, slave and free, to be marked on the right hand and the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast, the number of its name. So what we get in this mark is a number that belongs to a name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number, for it is the number of a man. So it's the number of a name, and it's the number of a name that belongs to an individual, one man. The number 666. Now, English doesn't have this, and so this gets complicated. English doesn't have alphanumerology. We don't have numerical values assigned to the letters of our alphabet. But Hebrew and Greek both do. And so when we look at Greek, and we look at the numerical values assigned to the letters in names that fit the context. Sorry, I was going to sneeze. Okay. When we look at the names that fit a context for the Empire of Rome, so probably an emperor who's demanding worship, Domitian or Nero, come to mind pretty quickly, because they're the two who demand worship while they're still alive. So, does the Greek spelling of somebody like Nero add up 666? It's the only Greek spelled name, that adds up to that numerical value and fits the context of the book of Revelation. And so this mark might actually be an allegiance to the Empire of Rome. How do you demonstrate that allegiance? Well, worship of the Roman emperor. Sometimes that was the only way that you could get Roman currency. And so the only way that you could participate in the Roman market, the only way that you could buy or sell in the Roman world, was to worship the emperor, to exchange your currency and get Roman money. Which, by the way, came stamped with the image of the emperor on it. So you got to make an offering to the emperor to get it. It's the only way that you can buy or sell, and it comes with the mark, the image, the imprint of the emperor in the currency. It's kind of like having a quarter. But it's the only name that fits. It's the only name that fits, that we know of. Again, what we've got is this Rome and the kingdoms of the earth, powered by the devil on one hand, who persecute the righteous. And then we have the kingdom of the Lamb on the other hand. And it's these two kingdoms that are in conflict with one another. It's not nation against nation. It's earthly nations and a heavenly kingdom that are in conflict with one another. They don't get along. They're not compatible in the book of Revelation. And this is the conflict of the book. How does the conflict end? That's what picks up in Revelation 15 and 16. And that's where we're headed when we get together tomorrow to continue talking about this. But really what we're talking about as Revelation unfolds is all about the conflict between the kingdoms of the earth and the kingdom of the Lamb. And we have two choices. We can conquer like the kingdoms of the earth, or we can conquer like the Lamb. If we conquer like the kingdoms of the earth, it's not going to go well for us. We can conquer like the Lamb, and that might look really bad for us now, but it will only get better for us as we spend eternity with the Lamb in Zion. We'll pick up there tomorrow.